welcome onto the Searching for Mana show, Michael.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This is exciting.
Yeah, really excited to have you on the show. Absolute pleasure to introduce further Michael Gronager. Yeah?
Yeah, it sounds good. Okay. You got it. I think you got it. Yeah.
Michael Gronager-Chainalysis, CEO, co-founder, founded the company around 2014, 2015. Prior to this won't all be technically accurate, but broadly speaking, was working at an exchange very early into the Bitcoin movement and saw it as a space that was a mega trend that I believe, Michael, you truly believed was going to make a huge impact on the world. And now if we come up to real time in the middle of 2022, the guys have just taken their valuation to somewhere around 8 billion and having recently raised 170 million, which in this climate is a monumental achievement. So super excited to get to know you more, Michael, understand your background and what lent you to build this brilliant company, and to understand also, the value that this company is bringing to the space overall, and then, ultimately try and think through where is this all going to go. So if you could be so kind to introduce the audience to Chainalysis in terms of what you guys are up to right now in brief, and also what your role within that is, please.
Yeah, totally happy to do that. So I usually say the best way to understand what is Chainalysis doing and what is the space that we are in, what is actually happening in the space. First of all, we believe that the crypto and the blockchain is going to transform the world of finance. It means that everything of value will move on some kind of blockchain at some point. It also means that when you believe that, it means that every company in the world becomes a crypto company. And I usually say that many times because that's challenging for people to hear. At least it was 5 years ago, and I probably couldn't say it back then. But today I feel I can. It's on the level where people would accept that might even happen. I saw that in the 90s. Every company did become an internet company. And the same thing will happen with crypto. What does it mean to become a crypto company? It means that you transact on the blockchain. It means that you send transactions there in various ways. It means that some of the value and some of your business model is tied around moving value on a blockchain. And to do that in a good way, you need to understand what happens on a blockchain. You need to have a confident view of what's going on there. In the world of the internet, you're doing that in various ways. You're using search engines, you're using Google Analytics, you're doing a lot of your own search and read a lot of blogs, and you're doing other things to stay confident on what happens there. You need to know the pulse of the internet before you can interact with it. You're doing the same in crypto, and the way you do it in crypto is that you use Chainalysis to do that. So for example, one of the first problems you will meet if you're an internet company is that you need to understand what are the counterparty risks you have. Are you subject to any compliance rules? And if you are, you need software that can tell you and data that can tell you what are your counterparts that you're interacting with. For example, you onboard a customer. Is the customer a terrorist? Is the customer someone from North Korea? Is what are you actually dealing with here? And we can tell you that. And then on top of that, the world of finance is not just the companies out there. It's also the governments and the government institutions and how they are basically safekeeping the world and safekeeping the citizens, safekeeping the world of finance, and ensuring that there is some level of stability around it. And to do that, they need to be pretty smart about what happens on the blockchain and in crypto. And we are helping them with that. Same way, selling them software and data to understand what happens second by second on the blockchain and understand in the view of where the funds flowing, not a transaction happened on a blockchain, because that literally doesn't tell you anything, but more telling you about what entity, what type of entity are sending funds to other entities, where they're located in the world, what is happening, and so on. And we can tell you that. And that's basically what we're doing through software and through data and working with customers that way.
Thank you so much, Michael. Incredibly compelling proposition. Just a couple of questions. You mentioned early on, you truly believe that every company, just like every company became an internet company and a digital company, will become a crypto company. How long's a piece of string, but what type of time frame would you put to that adoption?
So when you look at the internet, I would say today every company is an internet company. It's even you're locally, if I have stuff for cleaning, I interact with them on the internet, right? So it's literally every company today. But the internet is, what is it? It's from the early 90s. So it took like 30 years, so 25 years. And you would say, when is crypto from? It's probably like, yeah, the internet is from the 80s, but no one really knew it in the 80s. So you can add 10 years to that. So maybe like it's 5 years in. So let's say like over the next 10 to 20 years, every company will be a crypto company. Like 10 years in, everyone will be like, yeah, of course, there's just some laggards that are not really there yet. And in 20 years from now, it's just obvious.
And I would like us to talk to a part of the audience who would like to try and understand what the value of that would be. So just like in your brilliant example, where you explained that even a coffee shop right now would have a website and a digital way of transacting to it, but also a way to find it, like via Google search, and particularly now actually via Google Maps more likely, and so on and so forth. So we see the benefit of that to the ecosystem. What's the benefit of every company becoming a crypto company?
Yes, so let's start with what's the benefit of every company becoming an internet company. And I remember like in the early days of computers and so on, we had a lot of papers in the 80s and 90s. There was a lot of things on paper that didn't live in a computer. And just like imagining this like huge hurdle we had to get through to take all of that old world and put it into the new one. And if you ask like every single instance, why is this a good idea? You would all be like, but it doesn't make sense. I have a lot of like this paper. Why would I ever enter it into a computer system? Because I'm never going to use it again. And then at the same time, something in you was like, but if it's there, I can actually always find it. And I never need to think about where it is anymore. And it's actually accessible for me everywhere, all the time, in just the cloud, the internet, whatever. It's just basically there. Yeah. It's in cyberspace. And I think the same thing happens for the world of finance. If I take any specific thing, I will always meet an investor, I will always meet like a skeptic saying, but does it really matter? Is it really an important thing? And the reason why it matters is because everything ends there and everything can stay there. So let's take some concrete examples. If you're looking at a lot of the things we have in the world today, they are illiquid. They are like a house is illiquid, a car is illiquid. It's really, really hard to just sell it overnight. And you can't really value it, like put a value to it. Well, you can in the time of selling, but if you can't put a value to something, it's also very hard to create a financing structure around it. So we have a lot of objects out there where there's like pretty complicated processes involved to create a financing structure around it. Houses, cars, a lot of other things. If everything is on the blockchain, you can sell fractions of them as investment objects. And I'm happy to like have a long pitch on this, but I'll just make it very brief now in the beginning. And like you can basically create financial structures around that. It also means that all of these objects now become liquid. And that unlocks an unprecedented amount of liquidity. It means that everyone can get access to finance. And it's just like a trivial part of everything that everyone have access to that. It's also not like an approval of a loan, it just happens on the blockchain. You have like collateralized everything. So you don't need the concept of like a credit in many ways. So it's a death of credit. And it's also at the same time the death of illiquid assets. And that changes the world completely in finance. And it changes like how we're interacting and thinking about financing objects and doing things. And it will be a booster to the economy in many ways. So these are the long-term things. And then there are a million smaller steps that we need to take to get there.
Yeah, it's really exciting. I was trying to think through kind of visualization of this. And I was thinking about, if you take the Marrakesh market as an example that a lot of people may well have been to or certainly know of. And, so you've got all these stalls that are around. One's selling a particular type of cuisine, and others selling some random pottery, and others selling some spices, so on and so forth. And, to start with, this was all coming from a central distribution place. And then what happened was you suddenly had the ability to have a guide to take you around these, right? Before, you're just walking around not knowing where anything is, and it's word of mouth. And then you suddenly get a guide. And I think where we're starting to get to now in my incredibly simple, probably wrong visualization, but you riffed on it, is that, you've got a sum up machine on those stalls now as well. So you don't have to go buy this somewhere else. You're able to, find the right place to go to, and you're able to transact in the moment of negotiation. And so everything speeds up and everything gets more effective. That's how I like to think about it. Please interpret that better if you can.
No, I think it's pretty much what happens, right? You basically create this much more fluency in what we are doing in finance. And it's of course been done in many steps over the years, and many things have happened in those steps where you went from like writing things in paper and books, and you had to go to a physical location. Just think about like the amount of time we saved in going online banking. Like you would go to a bank like several times a week as a company, and now you're not doing it anymore because it doesn't make sense. And that's like a lot of time saving that suddenly happens, and efficiencies, and they have been converted into something else. And they're basically accelerating the growth of humanity, which is amazing. So I just think that like that's basically what happens every time you create efficiencies. We become creative and we can do more. And that's awesome.
Yeah, no, I love it. It's such an exciting phase that we're in. Michael, it'd be amazing if you could talk about a particular user case that Chainalysis has been involved in partnering or supporting with.
Yeah, so I think that we have, let's take like from top down. Basically, we have two core customer groups today that the majority of the revenue today. And one of them are on the government side, where we have 150 government agencies in probably like 35 countries in the world or so. And then we have a lot of businesses that have become crypto businesses and crypto companies. And there are like 600-700 of those that are customers of ours today, growing rapidly. We see more and more use cases popping up there, which is super exciting. But if you could jump to like where we really started was in the public sector space. And I think that some of the examples of cases there, solving criminal activity on the blockchain, like what's happening on that side. And to be honest, one of the reasons why I started Chainalysis back in the days was basically that I could see a core problem from public sector side and talk to law enforcement there, who were basically clueless around how do we solve a case involving the blockchain? How do we even follow the money here? And in solving crime,
was this from experience at Kraken?
So this was like partly yes, and partly from working. When I was at Kraken, I worked closely with the Bangkok's bankruptcy and bankruptcy trustees there. And I talked to police in Japan there, and they were looking at this case where basically $500 million were lost, and they didn't know where they went, and they had literally no idea where to start or end in that investigation. They just didn't know. And looking at the blockchain was probably the last thing that we would do. The first thing they would do would probably put the CEO in jail and just wait for him to talk, because they assumed he knew, and he absolutely didn't know either. So no one really knew what was going on there. And that was, to me, like, you cannot say that every company becomes a crypto company and say like, and that means that no one knows what's going on. That's definitely not a compelling argument. You basically need to say, and everyone knows what's going on. And to solve that problem became very core here. So that case was interesting. So it is basically crypto exchange. And looking at the blockchain, what I did back then was basically building the early version of Chainalysis around that. And what I did there was basically comparing what did they have in their books? What did they have in the books of the exchange? What happened of every single transactions that had been sent in and out? In their view, what did they think they sent? And then I looked at the blockchain and said, what does their wallet look like? And what was actually sent? And then I suddenly saw that over 2 years, an additional like 600,000-700,000 Bitcoins were sent out of the exchange that was not recorded for. And you're like, what is happening? That's kind of amount that were missing. And it seems like they've been slowly leaking out over 2 years. And it's like equivalent to a bank that have like a vault in the basement and there's a hole in the floor. And someone is slowly collecting the gold over the time. And then when the time comes and someone wants to withdraw some gold, that takes some gold out, there's nothing left. And then they panic. And that's basically what happens in Bangkok. And I saw that's like comparison with the blockchain and so on. And the next step is now, where did it go? Because that would inform like who did it and how did it happen? And how it happened were like someone had like early on compromised the keys for the exchange, the private keys that basically enables you to take ownership of cryptocurrencies. And then they used those over 2 years to every time people deposited money, they would take some of them. And every time someone deposited more, they would take some of it out. And you're basically doing that all the time for 2 years. And in that situation, what I did with Chainalysis was basically building a product around that enabled you to trace the flow of funds and where they went. And that enabled the use case of law enforcement to say, how do we follow the flow of funds in the crypto space? How do we solve an investigation by following the money? And these money then led to certain other exchanges where we could identify an individual that ran the exchange, and he then got arrested later. So that was like an example of one of the early cases in the space.
Was at this point the reception from the market one of adversity, because you were going to bring to it the type of regulation, clarity, prudence that at that point it wasn't ready for, or quite frankly wanted to, hide? I can see why, of course, the government would want to get very excited about this. How did the market at that point react? If you talk us through that, please.
Yes, I remember like several conversations. I would have a conversation with, for example, a VC. We had like at that time, I don't know, a couple of 100K in revenue, and clearly sold to different law enforcement agencies. But the VCs in the crypto space would be interested in a company like ours, would be like, yeah, but how many agencies are there? How many cases are there? It can't be that much. That's not something you can build. There's no time in this. Like, this doesn't make sense. And then if I looked at some of the crypto industry, they would be, I was also like looking at the crypto industry and the history around it, were that, well, you invent a new technology, and when you invent a new technology, no one understands it. And those who then understand it can actually use it to hide. That's like always how it works. So those who understand the internet in the early days could gain an edge over, for example, governments, and do bad things if they wanted and do good things if they wanted, but basically they could stay relatively hidden. And in the crypto space, it was the same. So then this narrative had emerged that, one of the key value propositions in crypto is anonymity. And it's actually not really anonymous in any way, and was never built to that. And if you look back in some of Satoshi's, like his earliest white paper, he's basically saying that it's not anonymous, and it's actually kind of doable to look at it. So the value proposition would never were anonymity. It was built around a certain level of, I would say, financial privacy, which to me is extremely important.
Yep.
And then it was built to enable trust, and like building trust in crypto. And you only build trust if you have visibility. And if you think about it, everyone who transacted in the early days in crypto, the first thing they do is to go to a block explorer to show others their transaction. That's not anonymity. That's actually trust and transparency. And that's how you build trust in anything, is through transparency. So yes, there was pushbacks, and there's definitely still people who think that like we should have an anonymous financial system. But the fact is that like crypto has actually grown to become less and less private over the years, to the extent where I'm like probably slightly concerned for the level of privacy you see on some of the more modern things being built, where it's basically, it's more open than Instagram, to put it that way. People are basically showing their finances out in the open. And I think that will have a little bit of like pushback at some point, where we want a financial system to work in such a way where governments giving like certain effort and time can figure out what happened, but you don't want your neighbor to know what you spent your money on.
Yeah, absolutely. So Michael, I think that's given us really good context of, user case and some of the macro. We'll come back at the final part of the show to talk about some of the exciting things that you're seeing right now, some big trends and some future predictions. But just to kind of finish on context of where you guys are right now, I'm just going to ask a few questions to give us some type of scale. So how many employees are you guys at the moment?
Yeah, around 700 employees right now. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, thank you. And you're geographically located everywhere?
Not exactly everywhere, but like for all practical purposes, probably yes. Just to give like a quick breakdown, like let's say around 300 people in the New York area. Yeah. Then we have another 100 around in the DC area. So like East Coast is pretty heavy footprint. Another 100 like is distributed in the rest of the US. And then let's say around 100 people in Europe, mainly in London, Copenhagen, the Netherlands. And then in APAC, we probably have close to another 100 people, I learned today. And they're based in Singapore, in Japan, in South Korea, and in Australia. So we are like, pretty much all over.
Super exciting. And I mentioned the the raise that you just achieved, and congratulations. So
Thanks.
a little bit about your venture capital partners. If you could, to start with, talk us through, total amount raised. And also, I suspect probably some of the conversations you recently have had ad nauseum, which is, what are the business metrics right now? I.e., where are you in aggressively expanded versus revenue, profit, and that type of metric, please?
Yeah, so the way that, like, if you look at a high growth enterprise SaaS company, it's like what happens is like at some point you can get a lot of efficiencies built into the machine, and you get so efficient that you become profitable. But at high growth, it's really hard. So typically there's this like rule of 40, where you basically say, if you have like 100% growth, then you're probably like not going to be profitable, because then you're burning 60% or so. So that's just how it is. And that's like basically because what you're doing with your investments is that you're investing in next year.
Yeah.
And investing in next year means that I need to hire all the reps that I need to be productive next year. I need to hire them now. And if I hire them now, I'm just paying salaries for half a year and maybe 9 months before they become productive. And if that growth curve goes on a certain level, then goodbye profitability. It's not happening. But also you can look at the unit economics in this and say, what is the lifetime value of a deal? What's happening? So steady state of this, if you grow lower, if you don't grow, whatever, what would be the margin here? And that's amazing. Like, we have a lot of like very good metrics around that. We actually can see that unit economic works really, really well. But right now we are investing heavily in growth, and that's like roughly doubling our revenue year over year.
Thank you. And to talk about the bear market that you've raised in, and we're seeing companies such as Klarna going from 30 several billion valuations to 6 billion, completely different market, but just an example of a fintech business where clearly companies either in a situation where they have to extend their runway because they're taking an aggressive expansion way forward and need the money, and then there's a down round. But you guys didn't do this. So clearly expansion is what you want to achieve. You want to hire your reps now, so in next year that you're set to take more opportunity in the market, create more impact. But the round was valued, I assume, something that you're really happy with. And so how did that come about? It's because if we were to understand the unit economics, the lifetime duration of a partnership, the enterprise level of that partnership, this can be an excruciatingly profitable business moving forward. It must be that.
Yeah, definitely. And again, like I would say, we didn't necessarily need the money when we raised them, but also as a CEO of a company, you need to always raise money and need to invest in the future. So one of the things is, of course, that like I can say, number one, this is the cheapest price you can ever buy Chainalysis shares for. So that's already a compelling argument, right? And if you're running out of cash, that might not be the case, because at some point, as you say, you're out of cash, and then if you come beggars and not choosers, you basically need to go for a down round or other things just to ensure that the company survives. I get that. That's one side of it, and that's of course puts us in a very beneficial situation. The other piece is that, like, when you look at companies as a whole, there are a ton of companies out there. A lot of them are like amazing companies. And if you look at how different companies evolve, there's so many companies you want to invest in. And most companies, they operate in some level of red ocean. They're basically one of many companies. There are a lot of execution involved in this. And they don't necessarily have, everyone has a mode, but they don't have a through mode around what they're doing. They're not the only company. They're not creating this, like, I would say, true 0 to 1 company where you have basically the majority of the market, and whatever you're doing, every single new customer you do, every single new piece of the product that you build basically adds to your future advantage in what you're doing. And that's a big difference in different companies. And in every time we see this and a new mega trend changing the world and transforming the world, there's only a handful of companies who really manage to take that piece. And then there are hundreds of absolutely amazing companies that are just growing, but they will never have the mode, and they will be like a million, but there'll be a handful of companies, each of their verticals, that all basically becomes the same. So you look at the cloud providers, we have GCP, we have AWS, we have Azure, like for Microsoft. There are many cloud providers, and that's great. That's just how it is. But there's only one search engine. Well, they're not. We have others, but Do they matter? Probably not. They're just there. But there's only one search engine, right? And in some of the social media platforms, there's only one player in each of like the types of social. So like if you look at video clips, then there's only one TikTok. If you look at other things, there's only one photo, that's Instagram. If you look at text messages, there's only one Twitter. And they kind of managed to show that there was a certain part that would own everything. And that's possible.
Is there
and what we're trying
is there a company from the previous iteration that you use as your example of who you are in this era moving forward?
I would say, I think what the mindset around what Google did and what they're doing, where they were basically trying to say, hey, everyone, we need for the internet to work. We actually need to enable people to search it, to navigate it, to feel comfortable around it, and to find what they needed. And they built a business model around basically selling ads. So they're like the biggest ad business in the world, which is amazing. And that meant that they meant this, like, people have this perception of premium for Google, which is also an interesting thing. But the analogy with Google is like, for us, that we are indexing the blockchain and basically understanding the flow of value. And that's, again, processing tons of information, providing that to customers who wants to understand what happens in finance. And when it's a finance, it's different than search, because those who want to understand finance are typically companies and not individuals.
Yes.
And that changes our business model to B2B instead of B2C. So that's some differences there, but some of the analogies are clearly there in terms of like indexing a tiny industry.
And there won't be a perfect one, of course. It takes a uniqueness to it to be the next. But just a fun question. Oh, because I was trying to think about that coming in, and I was wondering if maybe it was, Bloomberg.
Yeah, and that's like, I would say the company that we always also looked at there is like been Reuters, and especially before they sold off Refinitiv. And I think what they did is also they're providing information in a world of finance, and we're kind of doing the same. And there's some analogies there where you have a content arm that's like what everyone knows Reuters for, and we have the same. We are producing a lot of content. People use Chainalysis for a lot of different things content wise in the crypto space. We have a compliance arm as well, like that piece, and selling to governments like Reuters are doing. And then we also have the providing insights in the world of finance, which is like a growing vertical and something that we will see a lot more to in the future. But right now, the maturity of the crypto space is more like on the compliance and like follow the money side than it is on the opportunity side.
Yeah, absolutely. So exciting. I mean, you're on the Searching for Mana show. So I want to now go into the next phase where we get to know Michael and your background. But I mean, firstly, congratulations, Michael. What an exciting business opportunity. Obviously, like monumental work to get to this point. But, you're definitely going to be one of those big players in that Marrakesh market stall that I laid out. So exciting. Okay, so I'm going to start this next bit, and then we can get to understand it, hopefully, with just finding out what makes you tick and what your mana is. So I'm just going to ask a couple of relatively quick questions. You can kind of just give a quick response, or if you want to elaborate on it, please do. So at the moment, what keeps you up at night?
Wow, I'm actually a really good sleeper. I have to say that. So I just never. It can happen, of course, that I can't sleep on things, but usually I'm very calm. I'm not stressed about anything. But I'm always, when I wake up, I'm super fired up because I'm excited to meet the day and see what happens. So I would say what keeps me up at night is probably more what excites me and what I'm focused on in that sense. And what I'm focused on right now, I'm looking on, is like we see a world with a financial crisis, and we see like that unfolding. And of course, I'm looking at that from 2 points of view. One point of view is like, what's happening to the world? Just curious, like how can we help? What is happening, and what is my layman's view on that? That's absolutely useless for anyone. Then there's the other piece, and that's on the company side. And I usually look at a crisis like this as saying, like, what are our opportunities here? What are the products we should launch? How should we go to market right now? Doing that. So that's my focus right now, and look at like what is the opportunity here and how do we best play our cards. And that's clearly probably my main focus today.
Love it. And if you were to have at your disposal, the creativity to have the front cover of Forbes or something you hold in higher esteem, whatever that publication is, Michael, what would it say on it?
So I'll probably again take the view of the world right now more than on Chainalysis here, and I would basically just say that like inflation cancelled all due to revenge spending. So we don't need more downturn in the economy than needed.
Is there a particular book that you would like to recommend as something that's particularly dear to you, inspired you, and perhaps the audience were to be looking for something to read right now?
Wow, that's a good question. So I will say, like, on reading, I'm not the one reading the most books. I'm literally not. I simply will be too how should I put it, impatient to follow like 700 pages through. I've done it every now and then and learned a lot from it. I would actually say there are a couple of books that's been very informative to me and very important. And I think one of them were Claudius, which is, I think, Robert Gray, I think he's called, the historian that wrote around an emperor. And it tells a very good story about how a society works. And it's just told in such a good way. And you learn so much from reading, and you just say like, that's what it is, and so on. So I think that one is really good. Another one is Snow, Orhan Pamuk, a Nobel Prize winner, that wrote a book, and it's about like doubt, trust, and religion. And I think it's also another like very important book to read and just think about every now and then. And I think these are books that, yeah, it's more like on the, how should I put it? It's more fiction. It's kind of semi-fiction, but it's told in a good way. And I think these have been like clearly formative for me in many ways.
Amazing. We'll put those in the show note so that anybody can pick them up. And two more. Not in the company time necessarily, but around that. Are there any particular type of rituals or habits that you try and stick true to make sure that you're in a good frame of mind, healthy, having fun, whatever it might be?
Yes. Number one, I get up basically the same time every day, and the ritual is pretty much the same. I do my morning run, and like sometimes on a treadmill if I'm in way too hot Miami in the summertime like now, or if I'm in New York, I otherwise would take a run on the street and do that almost every day. There's like exceptions if there's an early call and other things, but that's like number one. Need to get up, need to get exercise, some oxygen to the brain, and just check that box on staying healthy. Then I would say coffee is a very important thing to me. I have like over invested in coffee machines in various places, and I love to make coffee, and it's just like to the point where I need to get everything right. And that's like another ritual. I just think that's the Wabi Sabi from Japanese culture, where you're just in this little zone of doing something with a certain level of particularity that puts you in a state of mind that's just like really good. In the past, I would do more cooking. I don't have the time to do it right now, so I don't get to do it. But it's like, again, cutting an onion is an amazing like exercise to do. Just like all the small things and getting details right. I love that. So these like moments of dwelling in the details and just staying in that one and just do things right is important to me. I think that energizes you in many ways. Then I think at least a day a week, just don't think about work, do something else. And I would say I can't do that all the time, but mostly I pick one of the days in the week, and then maybe the Saturday or Sunday where I don't touch any work, don't touch an iPad. I just like basically do other things. It could be going to like galleries with my fiance or doing other things, but it's just like whatever it is, I just don't really want to do work that day. And that's again just to let your brain do something else. And I think that's an important piece as well. Flex all the muscles.
Love it. A couple of questions through that. Is there a particular time or distance that you set for the running each morning?
Yes, 2 miles every morning.
And that's through the week or through the working week, 5 days?
Through all the time. Because again, I try to run half a marathon, marathons, other things. And I think that what happens is that at least my body is not meant to run a marathon. So I just get like different side effects from that. So I'm not doing it. And at the same time, if I go longer than that, then I would skip it. I tried. So if I'd say like, let's run 3 or 4, then I do it one, and then I don't do the next day because then I can't run as long, and then it's not satisfying to do less than the day before. So you skip it instead because it takes too long time. If I run like the 2 miles, it's very simple. I can do it every day, and there's always time to run 2 miles. It's like
yeah,
simple.
That's great advice. An atomic habit. Don't make it something that's a thing that you're dreading, but something that's quick. Look forward to you. In my morning routine, I'm worse than you for sure. Because you're really good at this. I'm literally doing 5 minutes, and I just do it like you do with fartlek training, where it's kind of slow, quicker. And by the end of it, as long as I've got the heartbeat up and it's energized me, that adds up if you do it the whole time. And I kind of look forward to it. Whereas there is a zone from, say, for me anyway, 5 minutes to 15, where I really feel like it's a slog. Actually, then if I go through that, I start to kind of switch off and enjoy it, but just don't feel like I have the time to do that and don't have a marathon to aim at. Have you run any marathons recently, or because of the way it affects your body?
No, I haven't. Like, I ran a half marathon, and I was in like the process of training to one, and then my knees told me that I should not do it, and it meant that I couldn't run for like 2 months, and I just don't do it. It's just like way better if you keep it in the right shape.
Yeah, same for me. I've kind of switched off any Stravas now as well. I was near a beach recently and just ran around for 20 minutes, and it was lovely. And that's at this stage where my knees aren't great, a real pleasure and keeps you fit. I like the level of pride you're taking in your coffee, and some of the individuals at Mana will really rate you for that as well. What is your favorite contraption?
So I would probably what I usually do. I can't go outside of that, but usually I would do a cortado. And that means like an espresso based thing. Sometimes I do less milk, some a little bit more, but it usually be a cortado. And then
that's the current thing, Michael.
It is the current thing. Yes, it is the current thing. It's like the right amount of milk. You don't get too much, so it's good. But also from a like creating the coffee point of view, it's fun. It's easier to do latte art on a flat white or on a latte because you have a bigger surface. It's easier. This one is harder, and it's good that it's harder because it forces you to like do a little bit better. And then every now and then someone else that's in the apartment would order a flat white, and then I can like see, I actually improved on that part, and it's fine. But
what's the pattern that you're vibing the most?
I usually do like the lily or a heart, and sometimes it can go in one corner, and sometimes all. It's
absolutely unbelievable. The different people have that in different ways, where it can be making sure you start your day by folding your bed or whatever it is, like creating an expectation to yourself that you look at the details. So that Japanese mantra that you talk about, there's different cultures and different ways of saying it, but I love it. Do you see that across everything? Are you quite particular? And I mean, I don't want to say OCD, but you could say that. Is everything where you're trying to be a perfectionist, or is that just in certain parts?
No, I think that perfectionist has like a slight negative ring to it. And I think that for me, I can actually live with quite some chaos, and I'm pretty good at navigating it. I think for me, it's the way I usually explain it. It might sound a little bit weird. It's like, I always look for some level, like some kind of beauty in what I'm doing. There needs to be something that makes it nice. And I will always go a little bit extra to make it beautiful. And that's like, to explain that, when I was doing my PhD, it was quantum mechanics, and like, how do you do math, and how do you solve equations, and how do you do things? And the guiding principle for me there was always beauty. If the solution is not beautiful, it's wrong. It's like, doesn't work. And I would go at great length, even if I had solved something, to go back and resolve it until it kind of became beautiful. Because if it's beautiful, people like it and understanding and remember it and just connects to it. And I think that goes with other things as well. So if you look at like furniture, like house design, like a lot of other things, it needs to be beautiful. And that also, I took that into coding when I'm not coding anymore. At least don't tell my engineering team that I am, but I'm not. And then I'm the same there. I don't just write code. I need to be beautiful, because then it's navigatable, it's understandable by others. There's a certain language, like inherent like structure in it. That's not just like getting stuff done. It's also, it needs to be beautiful at the same time. So I think that's a guiding principle. Every now and then you're busy, and then you just put stuff together, but then you go back and fix it later to make it beautiful. Because if it's not beautiful, it's not not pleasant to work with. It's not.
Yeah, sometimes it can be the little things that you can derive a lot of pride and pleasure from. Yep, really, really love it. So just the final big question. So searching for mana. Mana is gaming, particularly magic. So you have your power and then you have your magic. So it could be that you're brilliant in sword fighting, or you're able to jump really high. If we were to think about this, Michael, as your characteristic, what would you say your mana is?
I would say my superpower or anything is like, I think there's two things I probably would focus on there. I think one of the important things is to build trust with the people you are amongst. Like basically ensure that they feel that you are there for them and you actually are there for them, and you have a certain level of integrity, and you're just like clear about who you are, what you stand for, and like that you are very like open and can do that. That creates, the reason why I think that's an important piece is that if you take the opposite of that, then you are like kind of certain level of dangerous. And if you're a certain level of dangerous, then people are not going to tell you the truth anymore. And if you don't have the truth to navigate from, you know nothing. You're basically flying blind. So you just prevented yourself from succeeding. So it basically means like get people to open up. And the only way you do that is to be like the best version of yourself all the time. The other thing is like the way I process information is typically like I would start looking at a problem, and then I just learned over the time that like you don't solve a problem by looking at it. You dive into it to the point where the pulse goes up, as you said, in the exercise, and you leave it. And then I'm perfectly fine leaving a problem for a little while. And then I go back to it again until the pulse comes up. And then next time you can actually get the pulse higher. You certainly know more about the problem. And some problems requires you to do that over a year or two. Yeah. And I'm patient enough to do that over a year or two, because at some point a solution will emerge. And that solution is again driven by beauty, doing by things, but that's just like having this patience and confidence that like you solve it. And while you're not doing anything, your brain is actually doing a lot of work for you, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. I love it. So just to kind of re-clarify that in my mind on the last one, almost intentional patience when you have enthusiasm.
Yes. Yeah.
And that does come from the sciences, doesn't it? Really love that. Thank you so much.
It probably does, yeah.
So now I'd like to go back as far as you would like to, where we can start setting the scene of your bio, Michael. So think about a time where perhaps it either forms our vision of how you were growing up, and within that, some of the color and character about you.
Yeah, I think so. In many ways, I always think I've been an entrepreneur in various ways. The way I interpreted that when I was a kid was more like, you need to invent things. Like you need to change the world and be able to invent things. And how do you invent things? You build machines, build weird contraptions. And that can be anything from like, you know, whatever you do with the Lego, whatever you do in a basement with wood and a drill and a hammer and doing other things. And I would do stuff like that all the time, like construct things. I always like to work with my hands and build things. So I'm like pretty good at doing that as well. Not amazing, but like pretty okay. So then I would say, so that's one piece in like building stuff. I think when I then discovered a computer and the concept of a computer back in the 80s, got a Commodore 64, I suddenly realized this is scalable. This is amazing, because building stuff of wood and metal and other things, first of all, it costs a lot of money when you get it wrong. And then you are back to square one, and all the pieces that you actually want to build from are too expensive and you can't really access them. But on a computer, once you made one investment, you can build all the stuff you want. It's just in code, and you could do that. So that was like one of my first, like, I would say this made in entrepreneurship scale. Yep. It made like innovation scale. And then I got deep into coding. I quickly realized on the Commodore 64 that you couldn't build anything of interest if you wrote the basic computer language. So I learned assembler language, wrote machine code. I didn't have the money for an assembler program, so I started to write numbers on a piece of paper and putting them like tediously into the computer afterwards and debug and back and debug and back. But you could write amazing things and make a lot of like efficiencies from the computer that way.
Michael, just to ask a question there, because I'm interested what's driving that. I'm trying to think through the level of motivation that one needs to then go write that out on paper. This is not a normal person doing this. What is inspiring you to do that?
Just remember, the world was different back then. There was not that many distractions, right? The distraction were like, oh, should I look at the clouds today? Yeah, kind of nice. I can do that. And the other distraction was like, oh, there might be a television show from like 7 till 7:30 that I might want to watch. But the rest of the time, what else could you do? Then you go outside and play like some sports game with your pals outside, which was fun. But remember, I lived in Denmark, where it's like rainy and gray and cold all the year. So it basically thinks climate tells you to stay away from outside. So I'm basically like, there was a lot of time where you could do this. So that's one piece of it. I think the other piece of it is like this willingness, or like this like I always said to new entrepreneurs, if you don't want to change the world, just forget about it, get a job, do something else, like go in finance, do something. But if you want to change the world, build a company, do something about it. Because if you do want to change the world, then you can get through all the hard hurdles, and all the hard things are there. You'll basically, your rocket ship will crash. You are like stranded on a planet. You need to figure out how to get away from that and fix it.
What or why made you want to change the world?
I think there's a lot of reasons why you want to change the world. I think that like there are a lot of problems in the world today that need fixing. There's a lot of inequalities, and when I say inequalities, it's probably somewhat different that other people would use inequalities. I think it's like lack of equal opportunities. Because I think that, again, I don't believe in a world where we all have the same amount of $100 bills. I don't think that's how it should be, and that's not the game that anyone wants to play at the end of the day, and everything is kind of a game. But I think that equal opportunities are extremely important. I also believe in actually telling people about the opportunities and informing them about it. And I think a lot of the school system, a lot of like our society is basically constructed around not telling people about their real opportunities, because there's a liability in doing that, so you don't do it. And also you feel that you should protect them. There's consumer protection around what you can invest in. There's other things. So like educating people, telling, that's one piece of like how I saw it. But also you have like a lot of problems, environmental problems. We have a world with a planet with a fixed lifetime. We need to get away from it at a certain point in time. And basically every day counts. We are always in a race until like the human race is extinct. So we need to fix that. And that sense of urgency, I always had it. I just don't know why. Like, it's just this drive to say, how much more can we crank into the day is important, because there's always needs to be a sense of urgency.
Incredible. We'll come back to that in the final bit as well, where we talk about what we can be doing to have maximum impact on these topics. So that's given us a nice setting of how you were thinking at that point and when you became entrepreneurial. You then take us through any particular moments. Obviously, you've spoken about the fact that you're a PhD student, but you don't need to go there. Anywhere in that career that then sets the next innings in really you becoming somebody in business?
Yes. So I think like mostly there's like, we never change completely. You probably don't go from being, I don't know, a CEO to be basketball player the other way, maybe the other way around. But like there's basically a lot of jumps that's not likely. And then the likely jumps. You always think about what is your next step and how can I best play my existing cards for the next steps. And I think that like when I did my PhD, I probably did it from 2 points of view. Like one of them were basically, that was my perception of success. That was like my perception of what I should do. It's basically what you were taught in university. The highest thing you could do was becoming like a researcher. So then I got that direction. I succeeded in that, and then I realized I don't want to be a researcher. I don't want to basically do it that way. I need people around me. I need more interactivity. I need like more impact from what I'm doing here now. And then I left. The logical step to move was because I had a good understanding of computers even back then. I never studied computer science, I have to say that. But like I'd learned using computers from both my PhD, like what I did there, but also from the past. And then I got into the supercomputer center, and for various reasons, I ended up building virtual reality centers. Started a company or like a project around that, where we built it for the national broadcast. We did it for like other countries, starting that. That was like clearly entrepreneurial. We built some code around visualizing these models for architecture, for landscape planning, for what was it? What is computational fluid dynamic visualizations, did other things around that. And I was the manager for that center, ran that one for some years. Then 9/11 happened, and everyone forgot about virtual reality because it was all about national security and other things. I moved from virtual reality into grid computing, which was like an early day of cloud computing in many ways, using my knowledge about distributed computing to get in there, and ended up like running quite big, I would say, company around taking data from different big science projects, from the particle accelerator at CERN. I had a background on that side, so that made sense. We enabled other researchers to get access to that, enabled them to get access to astronomy data, to other pieces of data. And that company was built around like how I thought was possible back then. It was like research councils put money in it from different countries. I was running the company, and it was great. But after I've been there for a while, I realized that like it's basically just you end up being in politics all the time. People in the different research councils are not that much concerned about science. They're actually more concerned about how they can get money for an extra PhD in their country. And I just got tired of that like entire mindset, because it was not about changing the world. It was about basically getting bacon. And I don't really care about like that piece. I wanted to change the world. So I had like this very interesting journey to Taiwan, and we were caught in a typhoon there, and managed to get out, sitting in the airport in Bangkok for I think 18 hours. We were stuck there, me and a colleague, and discussing what's the meaning of life, what's the meaning of what we're doing and everything. And I know that was an inception point for me, where I just realized I need to do something else. I simply need to get out of what I'm doing here. I need to get into like building companies the real way. I've seen like a lot of big internet companies being built, and I need to build the next one. I just need to.
What did you, I mean, how to condense the 18-hour philosophical chat that went down in Bangkok, but what did you guys work out?
It was basically around like, why are you building a company like the one I built back then? It was basically to enable researchers. Why do you want to have people in research? What's the purpose of that from the world point of view? Well, there's two. There'll be parts of the smart things that you build around like basic understanding of the world. But a lot of this is just education. And education means you take people that are smart at something and put them out in the world to do something that's more meaningful than research, at least for the world here and now. And then I realized that, well, if I think I'm one of those, why I'm still sitting here, I should probably go out and change the world instead of like educating others to do it. So that was the point where I realized that like I cannot hide anymore. I just need to go out there and do that. So that was like the inception point, where I was like, now I need to fix it. And then again, there's a certain level of patience involved. I know that I need to capture the opportunity to do things. I navigated things. I had a weird journey there, I have to admit. The iPhone had come out that year, like in 2010 or so, and I was 10 or 11, 10, I think it was there. And then I started coding again. I hadn't been coding for 10 years. So I built an iPhone app, and this is kind of a weird story, but I literally coded an iPhone app as a demo and figuring out how you do an app. And the app was just like, you could press a button on the phone, and then your audio in the apartment would then relay the message. So just basically an intercom. So it was just a demo. It was nothing. It was really nothing. But I put it on the App Store and called it Intercom. And then the company Intercom, there was another one than the one you know today, reached out and said, "Oh, you picked our name. So can you code iPhone apps? Can you please change the name? And by the way, do you code apps?" And I didn't, but I said yes to both questions, of course. And then suddenly I was coding apps. So I did that on the side, weekend project. And it ended up being like fun, and I got a business out of that on the side. And then it was like the time where I quit my daytime job, got into that, and that's now we're in 2011, and I stumbled over Bitcoin, and best is history, I should say.
And you stumbled over Bitcoin right at the moment where it occurs. And so I was asked by somebody recently, who are you searching for in searching for mana? I was like, Satoshi. I'm searching for him ultimately, probably, I think. Who do you think that is? Or do you know, or is it you?
No, it's definitely not me. No, I would say Satoshi. I think the most likely thing is that like it's a couple of people, right? And I do think that it's most of them are probably dead today. That's a piece of it.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And again, it's one of the things where it's also one of the ethics of the company that I've got like in journalists wants to know like who the biggest holders, who are the whales of Bitcoin and who are the whales in crypto. You actually put a target on people's back as soon as you mention it. So I don't want to get into names here. It's dangerous for them.
We'll meet in an airport and over 18 hours. I get you drunk and you tell me who Satoshi is. But no, I respect that, Michael.
So just need a typhoon.
Yeah, okay. I'll find one. So it starts to bring us to the point where we're back to you founding. So if you want to do anything slightly before that, if you want to really tell us that founding story.
Yes, I think the founding story for Chainalysis was really, I would say, as I mentioned, I always been in big data. Like I did big data from CERN, like petabytes of data, storing that in various ways, processing, analyzing it in various ways. So like data space was clearly something that I excelled in. Also distributed computing was an area that I excelled in. I understand that pretty well. I got into running an exchange at Kraken, being part of that for a long time, and really interesting journey and learned a lot there. And I would say that was like when I probably got more enlightened about what is finance really about. What is that piece? What does it mean to run an exchange? What is going on there? What are the drivers for all of this, which was extremely important. But I also realized that like the key problems in the crypto space was like clearly, well, people need access to crypto, but there was hundreds of companies trying to solve that with all the different exchanges, and some are doing it better than others. But that was like just back to what I said in the earlier, like around what are the companies you can build, and there are the groups of like we can do many of those, and some of them will be bigger than others, and some will not. But there's not going to be one. There's going to be many of them, and at the same time, it's going to be a business model where it's hard to be like you'll constantly look at like at some point is over, kind of like the margins goes down. There's be like a race to the bottom, which is fine, and it's still good and interesting businesses to build. But I was really focused on how can I help the industry here? What is actually the real problem in the industry, and what do we need to change? And the problem that I had seen there was like, number one, the crypto businesses couldn't get bank accounts. And I tried that firsthand, clearly saw that was problematic. Talked to a bank and they're basically like, you can't do transaction monitoring. You don't know the origin of funds. You're basically dealing with cash, but cash with wings, and you can't verify the people that you're dealing with on the other end. And you want to run this globally. Good luck with that, but we're not going to be your banking partner. And at the same time, I saw the law enforcement agencies around the globe and the governments that wanted to regulate this industry and understand how they could help and safekeep the citizens that had lost funds, funds were stolen, people were abusing the blockchain for nefarious purposes, and so on. And I saw them being like desperate because they couldn't solve cases. They couldn't follow the money, and that was how they solved cases in the past. So I clearly saw that like bringing big data into this problem, analyzing the blockchain, and doing that would be a very core component here. So like in late 2014, I wrote down different business ideas around like one of them were basically building wallets. But again, I felt there were a lot of others doing that. The other one was this thing around the compliance and investigation piece, really solving the big data piece, and no one was really doing that.
Yep.
And that was the time where I felt like this is the right thing to do. So I basically started to build a prototype. I had left Kraken at that time, and then I started to build a prototype and got it up and running. And then I started to use it for solving the Bangkok case. And in the early days, it was not really a company. It was me. I had like a friend who had kind of joined at that time. And then we were basically trying to figure out like, what should we build? And I always believed that like we hadn't incorporated the company at that time. So always believe that this is like the time where the company is like between an idea and your couch. You sit in your couch, you're doing stuff. It might work, it might not. But then at a certain point, when I present this from law enforcement in San Francisco, where I spent a lot of time at that time. And suddenly, well, they wanted it, they needed the product. And then there was customers, there was a use case, there was a product market fit, and then it became a company.
And up to that point, you've not been an individual who, I think, was going and attracting the financing of a company. So how did you contemplate the decision of, okay, I'm between an idea and a sofa, this could happen or not, it could be side hustle. And then you get this conviction, you get this real strong feeling that there's a problem and a solution and this could change the world. How do you start thinking through, shall I keep this as my empire? Shall I go to private equity? Should I get venture capital? Do I have friends and family? What was the thinking there?
So I would say the thinking around that was like, first of all, saying the word Bitcoin in investor space in 2015 was like, come on, you just sent out the door, right? It's not something that anyone would invest in. So it was basically running from a little bit friends and families and then from own money and trying to make it work that way. And we did that in the early days. And like we really focused for that reason on getting revenue. And I think that's a healthy thing for a business. So like still, I think we incorporate the company we actually incorporate, it sounds like a crypto joke, but it's not. It's actually April 20th. It's April 20th. And you don't choose your incorporation date, but it is April 20th and it's like 2015. So that's the incorporation of Chainalysis Inc. And first revenue is a week later. So it's like May 1st. And that's first revenue in. And then we basically grow revenue pretty quickly. So in the first couple of months, we get like a lot of deals. So we have 30 customers in 3 months or so, which and all of them paying customers and starting to build that. And we really started to grow. So we were able to hire some people, grow the company, make it work, and just run on that like slow, like actually kind of bootstrapping motion in the early days. At the same time, we joined the Barclay Techstars Accelerator over the summer of 2015. Jonathan had become my co-founder at that time from the early days. Him and I moved to New York. He's probably more there than I am, but it was very, very interesting and formative days for the company. And we are both like probably push ourselves to the max in terms of like mental growth and understanding how we build the company, what to do, pitch a ton of investors. Many times we feel so close on getting funding, but then they say like, come back and say, but there's no TAM here. There's no crypto businesses. There's nothing to get, like it doesn't exist. It's just like, it doesn't make sense. And when I talk to them later and like, they always regret they didn't invest, but that's how it is. But then we get to the fall, and in the fall, we are literally running out of cash, right? Because we have money coming in, but the deal sizes is growing, and growing deal sizes tend to close at a like longer time scale. Yeah. And some of the 100K deal and 200K deals we want to come in there, they haven't landed yet, and we don't know whether they're going to succeed or not. And we feel like this is pretty close. So I got from our MD at the Techstars program, I get this like hint of saying like, start to raise convertible notes, and then maybe you take some of them, maybe you don't, but usually it's a good way to get people to sign up. And I actually get my earliest investor there. He makes a convertible note of 100K, and that kind of saves the business for a few months. That's enough to pay for many months of salary in those days of the company. So that was amazing. And he came in, invested. I still see him like several times a year, and he's been like very important for the company in that sense. And that also started this like, okay, money came in, someone believed in them. And then you start to create the FOMO, because then people are like, okay, if they invest, then we might want to invest in well. Now others say we also want to get in on the convertible note. But then suddenly 0.9 from Germany are like, well, these guys, they might say crypto, but I'm not even sure I know what that is. But they have good numbers in SaaS, and 0.9 are amazing like investors in SaaS. So they basically looked at our numbers and say like, this is just good numbers. So just from that, there's like, let's invest. And this crypto thing, whatever it is, they actually don't touch cryptocurrencies. They're just analyzing it. So it can't be completely wrong. So they invested and ended up leading our seed round. And that was basically how we got the first funding into the company. And from there on, everything was much easier, because suddenly it was just another thing. You had like an investor, you had like something going on, and it started to become easier. But that round was really tough to raise.
Yeah. And great to hear that then the venture capital and raising becomes easier. But there's some good lessons there, which is that to start with, you were focused on fundamental deal making and business. So that was in the blood and the makeup of the business. So then it's a choice of scaling into that opportunity and not putting pressure on the enterprise deals because you're like, oh my God, I need that cash flow. I suppose from that, the relationships are quality. But you say then it gets easy from there. And this is a whole other podcast, but just one thing that I'd love to understand is the journey of inside your organization. Certainly listening to a lot of the amazing values that you've got, I can only assume that there's some pretty strong principles to the culture and the team that you've built, Michael. They don't necessarily want what's on the website on the kind of value page if there is, but like genuinely, if you would talk about the strong culture in your organization and the challenges to have got there, I'd love you to talk to that, please.
Yes, I think like one of the things, it always starts with the founders, right? Like if they don't have the right mindset, no one else will have it. It's like that's impossible. And I think what Jonathan and I shared was like a lot of things around how we are thinking about building a company. So around the culture in the company, I think that it all starts with the founders. If the founders of a company is not aligned or don't have like the right mindset of right, they're building a company, what they're doing, it's not going to build the great culture. It's just how it is. And I think that like one of the things that Jonathan and I, we have like a tradition to do many long walks and talks. And sometimes in the early days, we did them in person, sometimes it's on the phone now. But I think the alignment there is around, we actually want to be part of building a financial system in the world that's better than the one we have. And remember, like Bitcoin and the first block in the blockchain basically is around the bailout of banks in 2009. And what happened there was basically lack of transparency created a lot of leverage in the system, and suddenly leverage is about to fall and everything felt like dominoes. And we wanted to ensure that would like at least be better understood. And at the same time, also create a financial system where more people have access to financial products and access to banking, access to other things, and ensuring that that's like worked in a better way. And we believe the best way we could contribute to that was like through building this data company. And that meant that like in doing so, we realized that there are a couple of important pillars in that, one of them being governments, being a core pillar in stability in the world and a core pillar in that. You can like have all the opinions about governments being bad and good and all the things in the world, and they're there, and they're probably there to stay for a long time. But what it is like they are the pillar, represent the pillar today of stability in the world, and stability is important for growth and prosperity. So we believe in working closely with the governments to safekeep people, to enable the financial system to grow, was a core value for the company there. So we built that into the culture, so people have like this view of governments as a partner in finance and not as an enemy of growth. And that's a core piece.
Michael, when you look back on it, was that one of the challenges that's ended up making sure that everyone who entered the culture kind of had the same type of mindset? Because I can imagine in that era, people attracted to the space wouldn't have all wanted to come and work for a data company who's, working with the government.
Yes, I think that's clearly that was one of the challenges. And I would say, if you look at our composition of staff, it's like there are govies from government that came in and they're like already drank the Kool-Aid. Then there's crypto natives who, some of them are like, I would say the younger generations of crypto natives are probably less skeptical about that than the earliest crypto people, who can be more skeptical about like, we need to build anarchy, we need to do this and that. And I'm not on the anarchy side. So I think that's the other piece. And then there's like a lot of like amazing SaaS people from like building scalable software companies at scale that just like sees this as being understanding the two mindsets of crypto and gov and can then contribute with a lot of value to that. But I think going back to the cultural piece, I think that the other piece of this is like curiosity and learning, and just having this mindset of like, we need to become a little bit smarter every day, and we need to learn and understand things, and just be like the company that knows the most about the blockchain, which is one of our internal like mindsets, is saying like, we want to enable others to know and be confident about that. So we need to be smart about it ourselves. So we have a high bar on that.
And at the company that I founded, we have to have almost more intel and information than most people in the space to be useful and add value. And so I am always trying to think, how can we make sure that the bar's high and we aspire that in the team? But I'm sure you much more successful. And so I'd love you to teach me or give me any methods that you're using at Chainalysis to allow your guys to be full of more information in the market.
Yeah, I think it's a lot in, it's also like you don't need every single individual to be a blockchain expert when they enter, but you clearly need them to become it over time. And also to, I would say, step number one, I think, is in all of this is that you need people that enter the company to believe in the bigger vision for the company and the space. So if you have someone saying like, yeah, crypto is a flash in a pan, it's not going to, it might happen. I'm here for the salary. I'm here. It sounds good. You build a great company, you manage to raise funds, but I'm probably still a skeptic. Then you shouldn't hire them into the company because you probably don't change them. And if you do, you have like someone that you need to spend a lot of energy in changing. So you need someone that basically says like, at the time of the interview, you basically manage to win them over and say, wow, what you're building is actually cool. I want to be part of this. I don't know whether we'll make it, but if we can make it, it will be amazing. And I'll do my part in doing it. And that's kind of the mindset that you want. So that's number one, to be bought in on that idea. And then number two is like, you need someone that shows a certain level of team player mentality, where they will help each other, where they'll basically learn from each other and can work with each other. And that's not easy. It requires like some level of like emotional intelligence to do that in a good way, understanding how other people perceive you and so on. And that's another thing that's part of an interview, where we basically do that. To do this at scale, we have initially I had like founder interviews where Jonathan and I would do like the last cultural checking and other things. It doesn't scale. So we have like cultural ambassadors today that basically are people that we identified as like really having a very good understanding of what is important in the company. And they do cultural interviews with everyone who joins. And that gives like this thing of like cultural additions, but still everyone that have this believe in the dream of the company, but also have this, how should I put it, mentality around how we work together, how we grow together, and how we, and this is actually another piece that I think is important, is that as a CEO and someone, as any manager, you need to respect people will not be there forever. It's another piece of it, just showing everyone that you're not in a prison. This is not, a job is not a life sentence. It's actually something that like, I respect that you will grow your career. I respect that you might become another founder. I respect that you might be here for a while. I want to keep you for a while, which is great. And we need to get the best out of that as possible. And I think building that like respect into the culture around employees are people who want to build their career. And right now, Chainalysis is their career, and they do that to the best. But having that respect that it's not a life sentence, I think, is another piece of it.
Super powerful, and starts from the founders. Certainly my personal experience has been it's incredibly tricky to get there. But we're trying to become a really good example of it because we're helping other organizations with it. And you can have so many businesses that have got all the traction in the world, but if they don't get the internal team incentivized correctly, and that's largely actually nothing to do with finance, it's about development, empowerment, and all of these type of things. But yeah, right back to the core of, is this a beautiful dream? If we can do this together, am I super proud and excited to contribute to it? Is maybe the most important thing. Okay, Michael, thanks for being so transparent on your journey. I'd just like to really, because I've taken a lot of your time on those first two parts, and I know you've got to jump off pretty soon, but just if there's a couple of things that we could talk about, then one I can't wait to hear is, the Hollywood version of where Chainalysis is going to go. And you can set the timeframes if you want to talk about several years, if you want to talk about 30, but give us the big, beautiful dream, please.
Yeah, it's so again, I think when we talk about companies and like venture and investments and so on, there's always two things that I think is important to me when I talk to other founders and investors and so on. first of all, you need to have like what is happening in the world. You need to have like a thought around what will the world look like, and you might be part of changing that and making that enabling that, but you need to have that as number one. And number one for me there is basically that we will see an increased use of crypto and the blockchain. You'll see an increased use of like how funds and how value starts to move there in bigger and bigger ways. And we'll see innovation in the space where a lot of amazing companies will pop up with a lot of great products in terms of like enabling people financing their car, their houses, their everything, and from renewable energy to other things, and basically enabling lower friction in financing and growth and prosperity. So that's kind of where I see the world going, and you basically see this journey of finance that we saw with the internet and how that's being transformed. And our role in that is twofold. So first of all, we are, of course, running a company, I wouldn't say on top of that, but utilizing that. And when we run a company in that sense, it basically means that then you need to think about like Chainalysis is operating in a world where the assumption is that this is changing, but we're also enabling that to change, or enabling that change in the world. And the way that we are doing this is basically we are creating this data layer on the blockchain, enabling everyone to stay smart and confident about how they're interacting, how they're building their businesses on the blockchain, how they're understanding the investments in the blockchain, how the governments are going to ensure that that world of finance stay stable and predictable to a certain extent. And that is basically our core role. So if you now look forward 10 years from now, what is Chainalysis at that time? What is the Hollywood dream there? And I think the company that we're operating at that time is like still a mixture where government is a big part of the company, where we're like working closely with probably like the 35 to 50 governments in the world, where they're basically using us as a platform to safekeep the economy, ensuring that they have an understanding of the flow of finance in the world and what is going on there, have a good way to understand and avoid financial crises, understand like what are the amounts of leverage that's being built into the system at any point in time, and maybe be able to prevent that from happening before that leverage starts to fall like dominoes, as we see in crises, and see that in the blockchain and in the data. At the same time, you'll see all the businesses wanting access to the same data, wanting access to understand how they can best build good journeys for their customers, how they can best safekeep their platforms, understand like if there's compliance risks, if there are other risks, and so on, what is happening there. We're also looking at a world of Web3 where the ownership of a lot of your data and of your value sits with the individuals. So navigating that world of the internet, of that world of the crypto space, becomes important, and an important piece where you need data for that, and you need to inform people around that. So that's like roughly where I see us as a player. So it's not that far from what we're doing today. That space has just grown like 100 times. So that's basically how I see it.
Well, super important and exciting, and like you say, like feels realistic. It could be even more monumental. You talked about earlier on in the show, you know, at some point we might need to leave as a human race the planet that we're on. We have a finite amount of time, and of course many other people, but Elon Musk talks to this a lot of the time, wanting to at least inspire us to go to Mars so that we start to create again the right type of technology and space ecosystem to be a multi-planetary. Is this something that you start to think about quite deeply as well?
So it is every now and then. I have my background in physics, and it means that I can also just, you know, spend the day in diving deep on ideas around how you do cold fusion and other things, and what's possible and what's not. And let's just like, that can be a good 4 hours spent in researching that and see where stuff has come. So yeah, it's like, and I think it's always interesting to identify what are really the challenges in terms of like how we do things. What is the challenges in space? What is the challenges? Like clearly Elon saw that like for cars, like batteries are a core part of that. If batteries doesn't work, you don't have electric cars. And like batteries is not good for space travel. So you need something bigger than that, right? So it's again, the energy source needs to be far bigger and far better. So there's a lot of things like identifying what are the core problems to solve. And then, as I say, the way I like to look at problems is that you spend some time until you get exhausted, and then you go away from it, and then you come back later. And at some point you might solve it, and at some point you might be dead before you solve it. But you would have solved it if you didn't die before. That's my mindset around it.
Yeah, because the reason I ask is I can see how that Marrakesh marketplace is becoming more connected. I can see how suddenly now we move from digital connection to trusted financial digital connection. So there is a world that is going to make more progress because it's going to interact overall. Opportunity moves away from Silicon Valley to distributed. This is positive. So there's no doubt that that vision you set is positive. But also, you know, we're in a year where obviously there's war going on. There is, you know, a bear market, and there is still a lot of skepticism about this new technology that's being put in people's hands. And you'll be aware as much as anyone, if not more than anyone, about still the skepticism and the actual genuine fraud that's going on with this new technology, which, as you explained earlier, happens when there's new technologies if people can hide. And your mission is to uncover that, which is incredibly noble. But until we have to go to a different planet, is this technology benefiting us? Like, do we, in your vision, in 20 years, end up better?
Oh, yes, way better. And also, like, if you just look at it today, the equivalent of cash on the internet is cryptocurrencies, right? And if you look at cash, it's like they're definitely being used for a lot of nefarious purposes, a lot. And it's very hard to even measure that, but we just know that like it's multiple percentages, probably more than 10% of cash is for that purpose. But it also creates a lot of freedom, and a lot of like the alternative to cash is like pretty bad sometimes because it's like wire transfers that's super monitored and everything. So it's just like the level of privacy might not be just like cash, which is super, super private, almost anonymous. And then you have the banking system that might be way less. And then you are in this situation where is the in-between? Crypto creates this in-between in a nice way, where there's like definitely a lot of understanding of like due to the transparency of how we can understanding and safekeep it. And I think when you look at the absolute numbers here, it's also important. We went from more than 10% in crypto back in 2013 and down to a few percentages over the last couple of years. And now we are counting basis points in terms of the amount of criminal activity. And last year, the majority of criminal activity were actually scams, which is very typical to a bull run because everyone thinks that they're going to be rich tomorrow. So they're just like, let's better risk $1,000 than not. And then they get scammed and that was it. And then they do another $1,000 and then they might get rich from that. So like scams are amazing in a bull market. And we saw that last year. So yeah, the majority of that is scam. And I usually call it, and I shouldn't call it, but it's like acute crime. It's like people got defrauded. It's not the end of the world. It's like, it's awful and bad, but it's not like, come on. Yeah. No one got killed or harmed really in that situation. They got scammed, which is bad enough.
Yeah. Michael, just to pop, 2 questions. One, I always ask if there's someone else you'd love to hear come onto the show. And just to caveat that, I find it very interesting to sometimes get different types of perspectives. So sometimes we bring political individuals on, sometimes we bring people who aren't obvious to talk to the space. And you might be an individual who's got a particular person in mind who would be great on that point.
Well, that's a good question to bring in here. So one of the things I do think that we have a couple of businesses trying to move really, really fast in the crypto space and doing many things right here. I would say there's CC from Binance, who clearly has like a lot of interesting views and like definitely move fast and interesting there. Sam Friedman is also interesting there from FTX as interesting people in the space. I would say that they have a lot of things to say. I don't know if they've been there already, but clearly someone that I think would be interesting to hear.
Yeah, from. Absolutely. We had Brett, FTX US president, come onto the show, and I think SBF comes on at some point. But you know, if you giving him a nudge means he comes on sooner, then I'd be very grateful. And we've got a good relationship with Binance Labs, so CZ at some point probably comes on. They haven't come on yet, but again, another nudge from you. Yeah, I would owe you. Love to talk to those guys. last thing, and I know that you have to go, if there's just anything else that you wanted to talk to the audience about just to end the show.
Well, I think I need, because I've been in crypto for more than 10 years, right? I need to say to everyone that like sees a bear market for the first time, that it's just like, this is how it should be. And this is like how everything that we see in finances, it's like there'll be like time for partying and there's time for building. But now is the time for building and just like growing all the next things there. Because the reason why we saw everything going crazy last year is because we had these amazing dreams of what this could become. And now is the time to make those dreams reality, because they're still true. They will become reality one day, but now we not need to put in the effort, because last year they were apparently only dreams.
Thank you so much, Michael. Really inspiring. I do the show to try and find in real time the people who are potentially building the next Googles, Amazons, and biggest companies of a generation. I wonder if I've just had an interview with that individual. Congratulations on your success today.